Really interesting moment there from Brad Stevens when he was asked about the relative inconsistency of this team. And he said, I know who we've been and I know who we can be, which leads me to believe he doesn't really know who they are right now.
When your team changes from night to night, when you are playing at a very high level and everything is clicking, you walk out on the floor that night and you have a mindset of, I know exactly what we're going to do, and we're going to beat this team tonight, and we're going to move on to the next game. There's a certain aura of feeling that surrounds the team. But when you are as inconsistent as Boston has been, head coach sits there, and there are nights that you feel like you really don't know your team, that you don't have control over the entire situation like you would like to be feeling that you have. And that's the state that they're in right now. They're good, and they can be great. We know that. But he's not seeing that now.
I think who they've been is the best team in the Eastern Conference at different times. And we've also seen them really struggle against teams that they're supposed to beat. They've been willing to show up and compete against the likes of Toronto every time they match up. But it's those nights that they take off where they're not playing with the same level of intensity on both sides of the court, where they get me-oriented because they think they can just make it through the game, where you really see the lack of connectedness here. And it's fascinating. It's not just the young guys, and it's not just the veterans. Gordon Hayward's been fantastic in their last 10 games in terms of a jump in his play. His net rating over that period of time is #1 on their team by quite a bit. He's really been a good version of Gordon Hayward. But then at the same time, that's been coupled with a really bad version of Jaylen Brown. Kyrie hasn't been bad. Terry Rozier's been a really bad version of himself. So there's these polar opposites right now within the course of their games, and I think that's why he's been confused.
Let me ask you both this question about, are we hearing so many more players nowadays speak out because of the social media aspect of it, where they have something to say about their own team? And as a result, we're seeing teams fragment because somebody in the locker room has something to say that basically should keep quiet.
That's a fair question. I don't know if it's social media driven, but there seems to me, and Griff, you've been around the league long enough to address this, knowing what's going on inside the locker room as opposed to what's happening publicly as well. But it does seem to me more players have taken control of their own narrative, be it via the Players Tribune or their own social media feeds, or what seem like orchestrated media scrums where they've decided they're going to get a particular message out.
Yeah, and more's not always more.
More's not always better.
No, it's certainly not. And I think, Coach, to your point, this team in particular has really strained under the pressure of expectation for the first time. It's fine to show up and be the darlings of the NBA when dirt working, overachieving is what your sort of ethos is, and everybody looks at you as not being capable of winning without Gordon and Kyrie. And the young guys in Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum got to be very focal. They get to carry the banner for them in winning, and that's the only role they know how to play. Well, those guys come back this season, and they have to take an enormous step back. They're 20-year-old kids. They're 19-year-old kids. They don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
They've never played any other role. So I think it's very complicated when you then compound the problem by lobbing the hand grenade into the locker room and saying, the young kids aren't getting it. They don't understand it.
Right.
That doesn't help the situation get better. It typically just cooler heads tend to prevail.
Rozier was another one of those guys, by the way.
No question.
For sure, yeah.
Achieved stardom status.
Right,
Okay,
really good in the
no
playoffs.
Kyrie there.
And all of a sudden you're back to being a backup.
And this is,
go sit down.
And this is how bad it is now. You're even seeing Marcus Smart, who I think is identified as much as anything by being a gladiator out there,
Heart and
doing
soul
whatever it takes to win. His defensive rating in the last 10 games is an abomination, and it's not who he is. But you lose a little bit of that heart and soul when things are off kilter in your locker room. And I still believe this is a team that's going to come out of the East, because I think Brad Stevens is going to figure out how to make this a galvanizing factor.
Yeah.
But Brad's learning for the first time what it's like to have expectation too, and so this takes time.
He said he's disappointed in himself. And by the way, that's not the only grenade that's been lobbed into that locker room, because just yesterday, Shams Charania of The Athletic said that around the NBA's February 7th trade deadline, Boston made their intentions clear to the New Orleans Pelicans surrounding their pursuit of All-Star Anthony Davis. League sources told The Athletic everyone can be available. So the Lakers experienced an even more acute version of this before the deadline. How is this going to affect Boston moving forward?
That's a hard question to answer without knowing the maturity level of each individual, exactly what's going on. You know, in locker rooms, they fragment off into little groups at times, which a coach has to do the best he can to avoid that happening. I know I've changed seats in the locker room going into a season just because I knew what the cliques were the year before and I didn't like it. So I had them sit next to different people and maybe rookies coming in, you know, whatever you want to use as your excuse for moving chairs around. But cliques in a locker room can be a terrible thing because you wind up now dividing the whole team, who's on this side, who's on that side. Look, it's something that goes with the NBA, and to say everyone is available, what are you, hurting everybody's feelings?
So there's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that Danny Ainge absolutely put the blood in the water for New Orleans to believe that anyone can be available. Sure. That's Danny's job.
Right.
He needed to make sure that deal didn't get made. But the very next time that Danny puts something he covets into a deal will be the very first time.
Right.
You can forget the fact that everyone is available. Can be available,
sure.
Is all designed to be the carrot. It's supposed to be the thing to muddy the waters. And if you're in that locker room and Danny Ainge comes and sits down next to you, the first thing Danny's going to say is, "Come on, freak. Of course I said can be available. I didn't say is available."
Yeah.
He's got plausible deniability.
Phrasing for sure.
Yeah.
Going to be an interesting few months in Boston.